Okay, it started. All right. I'm Ali Khan. I'm here for my management class 5113 with Nina. Nina, can you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure thing. I'm Nina Bradstreet, and I am the non-process manager for RFAB Facilities, so semiconductor facility for Texas Instruments.
Awesome. And can you tell me a little bit about what you do as a non-process manager?
Sure. So non-process essentially means that any of the systems that do not touch the wafer as part of the manufacturing process um, fall under my responsibility. So electrical, air exhaust, uh, process cooling water, chilled water, things like that essentially fall under my team. So I have a team of 4 direct reports. One of them manages the mechanical team, and that there's 14 people there, and another one manages the electrical team, and there's another 10 people there. And then I have a site civil engineer that reports to me as well, and a documentation manager slash technical writer.
Gotcha.
A little bit of everything.
Okay. So a total of about 30?
Almost, yeah. If you throw in the interns, yeah, it's more than 30.
More than 30 plus. Okay. And that, yeah, that's a lot of people. Awesome. Um, so since you have like a big team, how do your teams communicate with each other? If they have
Yeah.
projects with each other or just in their own team.
So yeah, I think generally within the modules themselves, so within the electrical team and within the mechanical team, we've got a pretty good process down. I think just me clearly outlining my expectations for how work gets done is what I've found to be the best way to manage that. So um, both teams have weekly or bi-weekly meetings. You guys have your Monday morning meeting, and Connor's team has a midweek meeting. And we have some clear expectations for what we expect to be covered in those meetings. So I think if you went to their meeting or they went to yours, you'd find it pretty similar. Um, and then as far as kind of across groups, one, I think physical, just being physically co-located is a really good thing. I think it helps foster some of that um, communication. I've been pretty passionate about making sure that the teams are close to each other and somewhat close to me. I think within the teams, having regular one-on-ones is another important thing. And it's important for me to be located someplace close to them so that people can, like you do, stop by and ask questions if you have questions. And then just with my direct reports, I make sure that we meet weekly, just so that we can kind of share what's going on within the groups and people can raise concerns or we can talk about what's going well.
Awesome. Um, that's great. So let's assume that there is a problem with somebody communicating among your team that you manage. So how do you go about resolving the issue of
Yeah.
communication?
Um, I think not even just specifically communication. I think timely addressing of an issue, regardless of what that issue is, whether or not it's communication or anything else, is the most important thing. Like letting issues fester and go unaddressed is it's definitely not the best way to address them. So first part of it is timely, and second of is just be um, clear and direct, right? Most people, if they understand what's expected of them, definitely try to meet that standard. Oftentimes there is, I find that it's a misunderstanding of what the expectation is or what the deliverable is. Most people aren't just intentionally belligerent or obfuscating. So I think one of the best ways to address the lack of communication is to communicate.
Gotcha. Awesome. And um, what is your approach to dealing with conflict in your organization or in your group?
Very similar. So timely is always the first, and that's just generally the theme with anything. I think good or bad, giving feedback that is timely is kind of the number one rule. Um, and the number two is being very clear about what your expectations are. So, um, you know, you guys all see my wall. It has all those little mantras on there. But one of them is, may not be, I may not have created the problem, but it's mine to fix. Or uh, so very similar with conflict, right? I don't think conflict goes away without someone addressing it head on and understanding what the root of the problem is or what the root of the issue is. Um, I think everybody wants to be understood. And generally, if you can get to that point and start working towards a win-win, you're on the right track.
Gotcha. And how do you handle someone who doesn't fit well in a team?
Um, I haven't
Or
had that happen too often. I generally think that, teams are made up of people with like all different personalities, right? Integrating somebody into a team is first understanding that person and allowing that person to, share their unique talents and their unique personality, right? Oftentimes, I think especially with the environment that we create here, one, we make sure that people understand that it's not cool to create an environment where people don't feel welcome. And I think once you establish that, it's a lot harder to end up with someone who isn't fitting well into the team. And if that is the case, then generally there is some other reason that is happening. It's either a mismatch with kind of skill or a mismatch with external factors. Very similar to the response on the other stuff. You just try to identify what those are and start addressing them. This role, um, this environment isn't for everyone. There are some people who uh, don't like working in teams, may not for some other reason be able to be as hands-on as the roles that we fill require. And it's kind of getting to an understanding of, okay, it's not necessarily that every job is for every person and you have to explore it. And it doesn't hurt my feelings if it's not the right place for you. Ultimately, I want that person to be happy in their life's work. So we just work through it.
gotcha. So let's just assume that that somebody on your team member isn't fitting well and has a bad personality. How do you deal with that?
Um, I've had that happen. I don't know that I wouldn't call it bad personality just because I don't think everyone has a different personality. We've had people who, had personal issues and they decided that they didn't feel like they fit into kind of the work that we do and their life situation. And oftentimes it's just sometimes that reflects in how they behave at work. But again, I think if you spend the time and effort to understand someone and understand their perspective, and as long as they're willing to be open about, you know, their own issues that are preventing them from succeeding or thriving, then it's usually a lot easier to address. I think that, again, you know, is this a communications class? Because I think communication is key, you know, that is ultimately um, the thing that solves most problems, not just at work.
Gotcha. Have you ever had a time where you have to change your personality to work with one individual and then change your personality to work with a different individual?
Um, no, just because I don't change my personality. I think that one of my main kind of grounding, grounding principles is authenticity. This is me, right? I may temper some of my styles with depending on who I'm talking to. There's some people who are, maybe a little bit quieter and can't handle the brash Nina. And
Mhm.
so I'll temper that when I talk to them. There's some people who want complete, utter, brutal honesty, and I tend to lean that way when I'm talking to them or giving them feedback. So yeah, so you do, or people who are newer in their careers, I tend to be a little more mentoring and informational than with someone who's later in their career where there's kind of an open exchange of ideas. Um, so yeah, so you do adjust delivery, but as far as fundamental personality, I think, you don't ever change that because then you come across as not authentic, right?
Gotcha. Okay. And the last question, what things do you do in your spare time that enables you to be a more effective leader?
Spare time. What's that? Um, I think generally trying to disconnect from what I do day to day is works best for me. So I enjoy going to the gym, and I think part of that is that it allows me to kind of set a time where I disconnect from work. So if I have this other scheduled thing that isn't work, um, that's very helpful. Hanging out, spending time with family, that sort of thing. It's really just it's a healthy boundary thing, right? So as long as you put a boundary up and stick to it. So ignore that email I sent you at 10 o'clock last night. Every once in a while, business needs change, and sometimes you have uh I call it there's no perfect balance. Sometimes I lean harder into having spare time and utilizing it, and sometimes I lean hard into having to, burn midnight oil because the situation calls for it. But overall, I try to balance it in total.
Gotcha. Okay. That was it for this.